Carl Gustav Jung came to a stark conclusion. The moment an empath stops handing out forgiveness on autopilot, the illusions in their life begin to collapse. And it isn't only other people's masks that fall, their own does too. People who once seemed like pure love suddenly reveal a manipulative face. Relationships that looked built on warmth and tenderness expose an exploitative core. But the most shocking realization is this: the empath was wearing the central mask all along. The persona of limitless forgiveness, slowly, year after year, poisoning their soul. Imagine the turning point. You forgive someone again, someone who trampled your trust, took your kindness for weakness, and treated your capacity for empathy like an endless resource. You force a smile and repeat the familiar line. It's okay. You carry their guilt so they can sleep peacefully, while you lie awake, questioning your worth. But this time, something changes. Instead of the usual relief, the relief of keeping a fragile peace intact, you feel something new. Anger, not a violent outburst, but a quiet, righteous anger. The kind that rises from a soul that finally says, firmly, enough. Jung called this a confrontation with the shadow, the moment when everything you've been suppressing breaks through into awareness. For an empath, that meeting becomes a turning point, a line you can't unsee. And here is the key. An empath's boundless forgiveness often has little to do with genuine compassion. It is closer to survival forgiveness, a trauma response, skillfully disguised as virtue. The empath forgives not because they are strong, but because they are afraid. Afraid of loneliness, afraid of conflict, afraid of being seen as a bad person. From childhood, they learned a painful rule. Their value depends on silently absorbing other people's pain. In Jungian terms, it resembles sacrificing one's true self for the sake of social approval. And the moment the empath refuses that role, a revolution begins. The system built on their self-erasure cracks. Masks start to fall, first from others, and then from the empath themselves. Jung's most radical insight concerned the shadow, the part of the personality we deny in ourselves and unconsciously project onto others. In empaths, the shadow often does not contain evil. It holds what they have forbidden themselves for years: healthy selfishness, the right to righteous anger, and the ability to set unbreakable boundaries. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For an empath, that darkness is not cruelty. It is suppressed self-protection, instincts of survival. The part of them that always sensed manipulation, but was silenced by the need to be good. When empaths stop forgiving automatically, they do not become cold. They integrate the shadow. They reclaim the parts of themselves they once abandoned to maintain connections where there was never real reciprocity. Jung described predictable shifts that appear when a highly sensitive person restores psychological boundaries. I call them the 8 signs of a sacred rebellion. If you recognize yourself in them, you may be experiencing what Jung called the birth of the true self. The first sign is the return of energy. Your life force stops leaking out. Instead of automatically absorbing other people's emotions, you ask a simple question: do I have to carry this? Jung noted that individuation begins with a clear boundary between the self and the world. You start noticing how drained you feel after certain interactions, and you learn to tell sincere remorse from manipulative guilt trips. Most importantly, you stop seeing yourself as responsible for other people's emotional states. The second sign is the end of the performance. Jung called this the death of the persona, the social mask we wear to win approval. For many empaths, that mask is the image of the endlessly understanding, endlessly forgiving person. But once forgiveness is no longer automatic, maintaining that image becomes impossible. You stop saying, "I'm fine," when you're not. You stop excusing harmful behavior. You stop offering emotional openness to those who have never been open with you. This is the end of emotional labor without reciprocity, and the beginning of honesty. The third sign, manipulation, becomes obvious. Here, the Jungian idea of projection matters. When an empath stops forgiving on autopilot, they step out of the empathy exploitation cycle and begin seeing tactics that once felt invisible. You recognize love bombing, the flood of compliments meant not to love you, but to extract your forgiveness. You notice accusations disguised as vulnerability. You see how your compassion was used to violate your own boundaries. The awakening empath stops projecting their own decency onto others and finally sees people as they are. The fourth sign, guilt loses its power over you. Jung observed that guilt is often internalized shame, useful to those who benefit from your obedience. When an empath stops reflexively forgiving, a kind of immunity appears. You recognize guilt as a tool of control. You stop apologizing for having standards. You stop justifying your boundaries. And it becomes clear, those who try to use guilt to pull you back into your old role are revealing how invested they were in your self-denial. The fifth sign, relationships undergo natural selection. Jung believed that real inner transformation inevitably changes a person's social circle. When you begin living in alignment with yourself, those who relied on your kindness and your lack of boundaries either change or disappear. It can hurt, but it clears space for healthier, mutual relationships built on respect, not exploitation. I call this process the great sorting. Connections fueled by your energy consumption fall apart. Genuine ones grow stronger. Some people leave the moment you stop being an emotional container. Others try to pull you back with guilt. And only a few accept your new boundaries, opening the door to real reciprocity. Jung compared the meeting of two personalities to the contact of chemical elements. When a reaction occurs, both change. But that kind of transformation is only possible when both sides are truly honest. The sixth sign, anger becomes a sacred force. Jung saw anger as the expression of suppressed wisdom. When an empath stops forgiving indiscriminately, they discover what I call sacred anger. Not blind rage, but protective energy that calmly says, "This will not continue." You feel anger for old wounds you minimized, outrage for boundaries you never set. This anger is not poison, it is information, a signal from your psyche about where you betrayed yourself. And as Jung wrote, consciousness does not awaken without pain. The pain of seeing the past becomes the fire that forges new principles. The seventh sign, pattern recognition activates. Jung's work on psychological types suggests that empaths often possess strong intuition. And when you stop forgiving automatically, that intuition starts operating at full strength. You suddenly see the same manipulative patterns across different people, and you recognize the repeating cycle: boundary violation, performative remorse, love bombing, and violation again. You notice emotional predators long before they can harm you. This is not paranoia, it is clarity, the ability to see reality without the fog of emotional confusion. The eighth sign, the birth of the true self. Jung described this stage as meeting yourself, not the persona, not the mask, but a whole, integrated personality. When reflexive forgiveness becomes a thing of the past, your real nature rises to the surface. You discover desires and preferences you didn't even know you had, because for so long you oriented your life around others. After years of silence, your own voice returns. And you understand. Your needs and boundaries matter just as much as anyone else's. If you recognize yourself in these changes, know this: your breaking point is your breakthrough. Jung believed the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And the empath who steps out of the role of eternal forgiver finally gains access to that privilege. Jung never romanticized this path. He spoke of the dark night of the soul, the time when old patterns must die so new ones can be born. For an empath, this period can feel like social death because their identity was built around forgiveness. You may lose friends who only valued your availability. Family may say, "You've changed." Guilt may crash over you for boundaries you should have built years ago. But Jung warned, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The empath must descend into the depths of the psyche, meet suppressed pain face to face, and only then rise into the true self. And this is where what I call the great unmasking begins. Your environment loses the ability to hide behind your limitless understanding. The narcissist can no longer use your empathy to avoid responsibility. The manipulator can no longer turn compassion into submission. The emotional vampire can no longer feed on your energy so easily. Your clarity forces people to show their real face. Jung understood this dynamic. What irritates us in others can lead us to self-knowledge. But he also saw something else. Sometimes people aren't angry at their reflection in you. They're angry that you refuse to carry their shadow for them. Yet the most shocking revelation comes when your own mask falls. An uncomfortable truth emerges. Constant forgiveness can become a form of control, a way to keep relationships at the cost of self-sacrifice, rather than through genuine closeness. This is the meeting with your own shadow. The realization that your readiness to forgive was driven not by love, but by fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of conflict, fear of being judged. And this insight is not a reason for shame. It is the beginning of liberation. It gives you the ability to love from wholeness, not from trauma, to give warmth by choice, not by inner compulsion. Jung drew a clear line between conscious and unconscious processes. When empaths stop forgiving reflexively, they arrive at what I call conscious forgiveness, an act that serves not the ego, but the soul. This kind of forgiveness does not come instantly after the injury. It becomes possible only after truth is acknowledged, boundaries are built, and consequences are faced. It does not ignore justice. It includes it. True forgiveness is not the suppression of a natural reaction. It respects the wound and then releases resentment, so you can see clearly and refuse to feed destructive hatred. Jung believed psychological energy follows its own laws. When an empath stops spending that energy on automatic forgiveness, the freed resource flows into creativity and self-expression. You regain strength for your own dreams, your own goals, your own healing. You shift from absorbing other people's drama to creating. You remember the passions you abandoned to manage someone else's crises, and you begin investing in relationships that nourish you instead of draining you. This isn't selfishness. It is individuation, the natural process of becoming whole and sharing with the world from abundance rather than from deficit. Jung understood, psyche and body do not live separately. When an empath spends years without boundaries, their nervous system stays on constant alert, as if the alarm never turns off. This doesn't always look like illness. Often it shows up as background exhaustion, chronic fatigue, inner tension, anxiety without a clear cause. The body learns to stay vigilant because it has learned to carry more than it can bear. When automatic forgiveness stops, a quiet but important shift begins. A pause appears. Tension starts to release, not instantly, not magically, but gradually. The empath no longer scans everyone's mood endlessly, no longer adjusts every second. A sense of inner ground returns, and the body responds with simple signs: more energy in the morning, less inner noise, a little more calm. Not because everything is fixed, but because the load has finally become honest. That is why these changes can feel frightening. You don't just transform yourself. You change the rules of the game for everyone around you. Your refusal to reward dysfunctional relationships exposes how fragile the old system really was. The system built on blind compliance. Your authenticity becomes a reminder. You don't have to wear a mask to deserve love. In his concept of individuation, Jung also spoke about conscious relationships, the union of two whole people, not two wounded halves searching for missing pieces in each other. When empaths stop forgiving automatically, they open the possibility of these deeper bonds, built on honesty and respect, not shared trauma. In these unions, love is born from fullness, not from deficiency. Conflicts are met as they arise, not stored until they explode. And it's crucial to understand, this isn't becoming cold. It's moving from hypervigilance to clarity, from constant emotional tension to conscious presence. The empath doesn't lose sensitivity. They stop being an open wound. Their attention is no longer torn between self and others. And in that state, real resilience appears, the kind that doesn't consume you. Jung called it the return of energy to the center of the personality. When you no longer live in permanent adaptation, the psyche finally gets a chance to restore balance. Not perfectly, not forever, but enough for you to feel again. Life is not only survival. The Jungian process of individuation integrates every layer of the psyche, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious. For an empath, this means balance between compassion and selectivity. You learn to empathize deeply, but you stop absorbing other people's emotions. You learn to see another person's pain without taking responsibility for it. A state emerges that I call compassionate distance, care without collapse. This integration forms psychological wholeness, the ability to use the full range of human responses rather than acting only from old traumatic patterns. Jung believed inner transformation never remains a purely private matter. An empath who builds boundaries becomes like a lighthouse. They do not drag others toward them. They do not rescue people by force. They simply stand, steady, clear, without self-erasure. And that steadiness becomes an orientation for others. This is how the chain breaks. When you stop passing on the model of self-sacrifice, it ends with you. Your choice to be honest, not convenient, whole, not limitless, changes the rules, even if no one says it out loud. You no longer teach your loved ones love through suffering. You show that sensitivity can coexist with strength. And sometimes, that is enough to change more than one life. Jung understood that psychological maturity is tied to a spiritual dimension too. The end of automatic forgiveness often leads to what could be called sacred disillusionment, a painful but necessary refusal of self-deception. You realize that endless forgiveness was not the evolution of the spirit. It was a form of stagnation. Real growth is impossible without meeting the shadow, without boundaries, and without respecting your own worth alongside the worth of others. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung said, is to become who you truly are, which means learning to forgive consciously, to love sincerely, and to act from wholeness. And finally, a paradox Jung valued for its power to reveal the deepest truth. When you stop forgiving everyone, you become able to forgive yourself. You release shame. You stop absorbing other people's guilt. You forgive yourself for years of self-betrayal, for toxic environments, for confusing trauma bonds with love. And that self-forgiveness becomes the most healing practice of all. I want you to hear one essential thing. Your forgiveness is sacred. It is not a resource to be distributed to anyone who demands it. Forgiveness must be a conscious choice. When your soul is ready, when truth is acknowledged, when boundaries are built, when justice is restored, at least at the level of clarity. Jung spent his life studying how a human being becomes whole, and he understood this. Sometimes you must refuse what destroys you, so you can open yourself to what brings respect. If you recognize the signs of this sacred rebellion, trust the process. Trust your anger. Trust your boundaries. Becoming yourself is not selfishness, it is necessity. And your refusal to forgive automatically doesn't mean you've hardened. It means you've become real. And the world needs empaths like that. People whose love comes from inner fullness and whose forgiveness is offered with wisdom. Thank you for watching. I hope this gave you something to reflect on. Until next time.